What would you do if the happiest day of your life turned into the darkest moment? What if the person you trusted most betrayed you in the worst possible way by having an affair with your fiancé? This is my story, a tale of love, betrayal, and the unexpected revenge that followed. I was about to marry the man I thought was perfect, only to discover the night before my wedding that my best friend had been secretly seeing him for months. I'm Emily, and this is the story of how I turned heartbreak into triumph. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss a single twist in this roller coaster of emotions.
My name is Emily, and at 28, I thought I had it all figured out. I had the perfect job, a close-knit circle of friends, and most importantly, the man of my dreams, Jake. We were inseparable. Our relationship was everything I had ever wanted, full of love, laughter, and trust. We had been together for nearly 5 years, and I was finally getting the wedding I had always imagined. Our big day was just around the corner, and everything felt like it was falling into place. But little did I know, the world I had carefully built would come crashing down in the blink of an eye. Jake and I met during our last year of college. He was charming. Everyone loved him. He had that kind of smile that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. He was the kind of guy you could bring home to your parents and not have to worry about a thing. He had this natural ability to make people believe that he was perfect. And as it turns out, I wasn't the only one who thought that. The first time I introduced Jake to Sarah, my best friend since high school, I could tell they hit it off. Sarah had always been the kind of friend who was full of energy, always making everyone laugh, always in the middle of the fun. But underneath all that charm, she had a side that not many saw. She was a perfectionist, driven by a need for validation. She didn't just want attention, she craved it. And I never thought much of it. She was my best friend. I trusted her with everything. But over the years, I started to notice little things. Small moments when she would talk about Jake. A glint in her eye that I couldn't quite explain. Maybe I had brushed it off, wanting to believe that it was nothing. Sarah and I had been inseparable since high school. She was the one I'd go to for advice, for comfort, for a shoulder to cry on. In those early years of our friendship, she had been my pillar, always there, always supportive. We shared everything, from our favorite childhood memories to the struggles of growing up. And when I started dating Jake, she was there, always cheering us on. I never doubted her loyalty. It wasn't just Jake who thought Sarah was wonderful. Everyone did. She had a way of making everyone feel special. I watched as she effortlessly glided through life, building friendships, collecting admirers, and being the center of attention at every social gathering. In her world, it seemed like everything came easy. But I began to see the cracks, especially when Jake and I got serious. It was subtle at first, a lingering touch, an inside joke that seemed to go on a little too long, but I convinced myself I was overthinking. After all, Sarah was my best friend, right? She wouldn't betray me. Not like that. The wedding preparations had been going smoothly. The venue was perfect, the invitations had gone out, and the bridal party was in full swing. I couldn't have asked for a better maid of honor. Sarah was everything I needed her to be. Organized, cheerful, and always there to help with the endless tasks leading up to the big day. But looking back, I now realize how much of her presence felt like an act. She was always there, but sometimes I caught glimpses of something else. Something I couldn't put my finger on. And then there was Jake. He had been everything I had hoped for in a partner. When we were together, it felt like the world stopped. He was attentive, caring, and seemed to genuinely love me. I loved him with everything I had, believing that he was the person I would spend the rest of my life with. We had plans, dreams, and a shared future. I couldn't imagine life without him. But just days before the wedding, everything changed. I was in the final stages of getting ready. The dress had been altered, the flowers were picked out, and the countdown was ticking away. But something felt off. My gut had been nagging me for days, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The morning of my bachelorette party, I had come across a message, an innocuous text from Jake's phone. Or so I thought. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A simple reminder, perhaps a message he forgot to delete. But as I opened the conversation, my stomach dropped. It was a thread between Jake and Sarah. The words were unmistakable. They were more than just friendly. There were flirtations, jokes about how they couldn't wait to see each other again. My breath hitched in my throat as I scrolled through more messages, each one more intimate than the last. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. How could this happen? How could the two people I trusted most do this to me? I wanted to scream, to confront them right there. But something held me back. I was still in shock, unable to process the truth that was right in front of me. That night, I tried to approach Jake, but he brushed me off. He seemed distracted, avoiding eye contact, his words clipped. I knew something was wrong. I needed answers. And then I found the confirmation I was dreading. Sarah and Jake had been having an affair for months. I never imagined that the woman I had considered a sister would betray me in such a devastating way. And the man I was about to marry, the man I had trusted, was no better. They had both lied to me, manipulated me, and used my trust against me. And that, my friends, was just the beginning of a journey I never could have predicted. That night, the night I uncovered the truth, was the beginning of everything unraveling. I could hardly believe what I had discovered. Every time I tried to digest it, it felt like the earth beneath me shifted again, making the ground unsteady. Sarah and Jake, together, behind my back. My heart raced with disbelief and pain. How could I have been so blind? I remember standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection as I tried to hold myself together. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of confusion. I had always prided myself on being perceptive, on trusting my instincts. But in this situation, this overwhelming betrayal, I couldn't make sense of anything anymore. All I could think was, why didn't I see the signs? It was almost surreal. Every happy memory I had with Jake, every loving word from Sarah came crashing down in front of me, like an illusion that was now shattered beyond repair. I kept asking myself, how long had they been doing this? How many moments had I shared with them, completely unaware of the lies they were weaving behind my back? I had to know more. There was no way I could marry Jake, no way I could step down the aisle knowing what I now knew. But how could I confront them? How could I even begin to process this? My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, emotions, and anger, but I couldn't bring myself to do anything yet. I needed more answers, more pieces to this puzzle that was quickly becoming my nightmare. The next few days felt like I was living in a dream, but it wasn't the sweet kind of dream. It was the nightmare you wish you could wake up from. The days leading up to the wedding were supposed to be filled with excitement, anticipation, and joy, but instead I spent every moment obsessing over the texts, scrolling through their conversation like a person in a daze, trying to find some sort of justification, something that could explain this away. But there was nothing. There was no explanation, no excuse. It was just betrayal, plain and simple. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was everything they had taken from me. My trust, my peace of mind, my sense of security. Sarah wasn't just my maid of honor, my best friend. She was my sister in all but blood. And Jake wasn't just my fiancé. He was the man I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. How could they have done this to me? I tried to act normal, to go through the motions of wedding planning like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. And even though my wedding day was fast approaching, I knew there was no way I could walk down the aisle to Jake without confronting him, without confronting both of them. Then came the first clue. It was subtle, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it was a crack in the facade. I was at Sarah's house a few days before the wedding, finalizing details, trying to distract myself from the chaos in my mind. While we were going over last-minute arrangements, Sarah got a phone call. She stepped out of the room, leaving me alone for a few moments. As I sat there, my eyes drifted to her purse sitting on the coffee table. I don't know why I did it, but something told me to look inside. I reached for her purse, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands were shaking as I unzipped the compartment. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but at that moment, I needed answers. As I rifled through her things, my fingers brushed against a small envelope. It was addressed to her. I opened it quickly, desperate to know more, to feel some semblance of control over this madness. Inside was a card. A wedding card. But it wasn't for me. It was for Jake. I froze, staring at the words written inside, words of affection and passion. The card was a confession, a declaration of love, but it wasn't from me. It was from Sarah. I'll love you always, forever and ever. I felt my stomach twist. This was all I needed to confirm that my suspicions were right. The affair wasn't just a fling, it was a secret relationship. A lie built on lies. The proof I had been searching for was right there in my hands. I stuffed the card back into the envelope, my mind reeling. I felt dizzy, sick to my stomach, but the anger, the hurt, it all started to rise to the surface. I had been living in a fog, pretending everything was okay, pretending Sarah was still my best friend, and Jake was still my perfect fiancé. But now I couldn't unsee what I had learned. I couldn't pretend anymore. When Sarah returned, I put the envelope back in her purse, my hands trembling. She didn't seem to notice anything, but I did, and I knew I had to confront her, to confront both of them. That night, I called Jake. My heart was beating so fast I could barely speak. He answered on the first ring, his voice full of warmth and care, like nothing was wrong. "Hey, babe, what's up?" I couldn't hold it in any longer. I let the words spill out of me, accusing him of everything. The affair, the lies, everything. His reaction was exactly what I feared. It was defensive, dismissive. He tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was too strong, too overwhelming. He told me it was a mistake, that it had never meant anything, that it was over, and we could move past it. But I couldn't. I couldn't forgive him. "You've already made your decision, Jake," I said, my voice breaking. "You've already chosen, and it's not me." And just like that, everything changed. I didn't know it then, but this would be the beginning of something far bigger than just a ruined wedding. This would be the beginning of my revenge. Not to hurt them, not to get even, but to rise above, to show them that I was stronger than their betrayal. I walked away, knowing that my path ahead would be difficult, but I also knew that somehow this was just the beginning of my new story, and I would write it myself.
The days that followed that terrible confrontation were the hardest of my life. The wedding, which had once been a source of excitement and joy, now felt like a distant memory, one I could never fully reclaim. I'd hoped that by confronting Jake, by forcing the truth into the light, I'd feel some sense of relief. But all I felt was numbness. The kind of numbness that comes from knowing you've been betrayed by the two people you trusted most in the world. I knew I couldn't marry Jake, not after everything. It wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the gaslighting, and the complete disregard for me as a person, as a partner. When I ended things with him, I thought I was strong. But the truth was, I was still reeling, still trying to piece together the wreckage of my heart. And I wasn't done yet. I couldn't be. There was something deeper at play, something far darker that I needed to understand. I didn't just want to walk away. I needed to know why. But as the days passed, the suspicion I'd buried deep within me began to grow. Something didn't sit right with me. Sarah's behavior had been strange ever since the night I found the card in her purse. She acted distant, almost like she was trying to avoid me. At first, I thought it was my own paranoia. After all, I had just dropped a bombshell on her. But it wasn't just that. It was something in the way she spoke, the way she avoided certain topics, how she seemed more calm than I would have expected from someone who had just been caught betraying her best friend. It was the small things. Her eyes avoiding mine when I tried to talk about the wedding or our friendship. The way she'd rush through conversations, not allowing any space for deeper thoughts, like she was hiding something beneath her casual demeanor. I had known Sarah for so long, and I could tell when something was off. But still, I didn't have the proof I needed to confront her. Not yet. I spent sleepless nights scrolling through old messages, replaying every conversation in my head, every interaction with both Jake and Sarah. I couldn't stop. The more I thought about it, the more questions arose. How long had this affair really been going on? Was there something else I was missing? It was only when I took a step back, when I tried to distance myself from the wreckage, that I started noticing the pattern. I began to see the web of manipulation they'd both spun, not just between us, but between themselves. They were careful, far more careful than I had realized at first. Their relationship hadn't just been an impulsive mistake. It had been planned, deliberate, and now I could see the holes in their stories. The turning point came when Sarah asked me to meet her for coffee. It seemed harmless enough. I'd been avoiding her for days, but I still cared about her. I wanted to know what had been going on in her head. I couldn't just let it go without hearing her side, though deep down I already knew it would be a lie. We met at a small cafe that was a favorite of ours from our college days. I tried to remain calm, but every fiber of my being was screaming at me to stay alert. The moment she sat down across from me, I could tell something was wrong. She was nervous, her hands fidgeting with the coffee cup and her eyes darting around the room. It was nothing like the confident, outgoing woman I had known. "I know you're angry, Em," she started, her voice too soft, too careful. "I just wanted to talk. I think we need to clear the air." I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand she explain herself, but I knew I needed to be strategic. If I gave her an inch, she'd take a mile. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. "Clear the air?" I repeated, narrowing my eyes. "You've had months to do that, Sarah, and yet here we are." Her face flushed, and she hesitated, unsure how to respond. It was then that I realized something else. She was nervous, but not because she felt guilty. She was nervous because she was about to lie to my face. "I know you're upset, but I never meant to hurt you. I don't want to lose you as a friend, Em. I was stupid. I made a mistake. Jake and I..." She paused, searching my face for a reaction, but I gave her nothing. "A mistake?" I cut her off. "No, Sarah, this wasn't a mistake. You've been lying to me, to Jake, to everyone around you. You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" Her eyes widened. For a moment, I saw a flicker of panic in them, and that was all I needed. I didn't have the full story yet, but now I knew. I knew she was hiding something more, something far darker than what I had already uncovered. "It's over, Sarah," I said, standing up from the table, my voice calm but firm. "I can't be friends with someone like you, someone who would do this to me." But as I walked out of that cafe, I felt the final shift inside me. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was resolved. I would get to the bottom of this. I would understand why Jake and Sarah had done this. And once I had all the pieces of the puzzle, I would be the one to decide how this story would end. Not them. I wasn't going to let them have the last word. Not this time.
The days following my meeting with Sarah were a blur. Part of me wanted to bury the memory of her nervous face, the way she tried to manipulate the situation, pretending to be sorry when I knew better. But the other part of me was focused, driven. I knew I had to be patient. I needed to uncover everything, piece by piece, before I made my move. But there was one thing I hadn't accounted for, an unexpected twist that would change everything I thought I knew about Sarah, about Jake, and about my plan for revenge. It all started with an email. A simple, unassuming email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "For your eyes only, don't tell Jake you got this." At first I thought it might be spam, but when I opened it, my heart skipped a beat. It was a message from someone who claimed to be a close friend of Sarah's. They said they had important information that could help me understand everything. The email itself was short, cryptic, but it made one thing clear. Sarah wasn't just manipulating me. She was playing a far more dangerous game. The message outlined several key pieces of information that I hadn't known, things that made my blood run cold. First, it revealed that Sarah had been talking about our relationship behind my back for months, planting seeds of doubt in my Jake and I in subtle ways. But more disturbing was the fact that Jake wasn't the only one involved in the affair. There were other men who had no idea about the web Sarah had woven, men who had been using her just like Jake had. I sat there staring at the email, trying to process what I just read. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a sick game. But I couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. I had to keep my focus, stay patient. This was the perfect red herring. It was designed to throw me off course, to make me think that Sarah was just a player in a much bigger scheme. I knew it could be a trap. Whoever had sent this email could have been trying to distract me, divert my attention from what really mattered. But deep down, I knew there was more to this. There always was. It didn't take long for me to formulate a plan. I wasn't just going to confront Jake and Sarah again. No, this time I was going to make them sweat. I would show them that I wasn't the fragile woman they thought I was, that I wasn't just some victim. I had a life to rebuild, a future to create, and I wasn't going to do it quietly. I was going to thrive, and they would watch. I started by distancing myself further from Sarah. I knew she was still trying to reach out, to maintain some semblance of normalcy in our broken friendship. But I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Every time she reached out with some feigned apology or half-hearted attempt at reconciliation, I turned her down. Instead, I focused on myself. I threw myself into work, into building my new life, finding new hobbies and meeting new people. But I didn't mean that I wasn't still watching them. I needed to understand their every move. And then came the execution. I wasn't going to let them off the hook with a simple confrontation. They needed to know that their actions had consequences, that they couldn't just waltz away with this with no repercussions. That's when I decided to do something bold, something that would shake them to their core. I contacted a mutual acquaintance of Sarah and Jake, a friend from college who had no idea about the affair. Her name was Rachel, and she had always been close to both Sarah and I. I knew she had been in the dark just like I had been, but now I was going to use that to my advantage. I told Rachel about the affair, about everything I had uncovered, about Sarah's betrayal, Jake's lies, and the email I had received. At first, she was horrified, unsure what to believe, but I didn't stop there. I showed her the messages, the cards, the damning evidence that painted the picture of just how deep the betrayal had gone. Rachel didn't like what she was hearing, but she couldn't deny the truth. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed everything. And then I made my move. I planted the seed of doubt. I told Rachel that I knew Sarah and Jake had been planning a trip together. They were supposed to be going away on some romantic getaway, a second honeymoon of sorts. What I didn't tell Rachel was that I had already arranged to be in the same place at the same time. I wasn't going to let them think they could escape without facing the consequences. No, I was going to be right there, watching, listening, and making sure they knew that I hadn't forgotten, that I would never forget. The day of the trip, I showed up, uninvited but undeterred. I could see the surprise in their eyes when they spotted me at the same resort, the same restaurant where they had planned their little getaway. But it wasn't just surprise. It was panic. They didn't know I had gotten this far. They didn't know that I had been watching, that I had orchestrated everything. Sarah tried to act casual, like nothing was wrong, but there was a tremor in her voice when she spoke to me. Jake was more subtle, but I could see the guilt in his eyes, the way he couldn't meet my gaze. And that, right there, was the payoff. They had expected me to be broken, to have walked away without a fight. But I was far from broken. I had orchestrated this entire encounter, just to show them that I had control. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the one pulling the strings now, and I was enjoying every moment of it. The game had just begun, and they had no idea what was coming next.
I knew the moment I saw their faces at the resort, I had them. But the more I observed, the more I realized that everything I had believed about Sarah, about Jake, was just the tip of the iceberg. I had come to expect deceit, manipulation, and betrayal, but something felt off. There was a second layer to this mystery I had yet to uncover, something deeper, darker, that neither of them had prepared for. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything else. The web of lies they had been weaving, the hidden motives, the people they had involved. I was starting to peel back the surface, and what I found wasn't just shocking, it was terrifying. At first, it seemed like a simple story of a broken relationship, betrayed by those I loved most. But now, every detail, every glance between Jake and Sarah felt like a puzzle that didn't quite fit. They were acting like everything was normal, like they could continue to live their lives without facing the consequences. I was the one who was supposed to feel humiliated, broken, defeated. But no, it was them who were on edge, who were walking on eggshells. I spent the entire weekend at the resort, staying in the same hotel as them, but keeping my distance. I could have confronted them. I could have pulled them aside and demanded more answers. But I knew better. What I needed wasn't just the truth. I needed leverage. I needed something they weren't expecting. So I watched. I listened. Every word, every movement, every interaction between them became crucial. And as I observed, something began to bother me, something that hadn't crossed my mind before. I noticed the way Jake would glance at Sarah, the way his hand would subtly brush hers, like there was something unsaid between them. But then there was something strange. When they thought no one was looking, I saw Sarah make a quick gesture, a look over her shoulder, a subtle hand movement that Jake responded to without question. It was as if they were communicating in some code in a way that no one else could see. It wasn't a lover's glance. It was something else entirely. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just an affair. There was something more going on, something that felt orchestrated. There was a plan, a hidden agenda. They weren't just betraying me, they were involved in something bigger. And suddenly, I had this sickening feeling that I wasn't the only one getting played here. The next night, I followed them. Not out of vengeance, but out of curiosity, a need to understand. I had to know what they were doing when they thought no one was watching. I stayed hidden, slipping through shadows, moving with the stealth of someone who had learned to blend into the background. They went to a bar in the hotel, a place that seemed inconspicuous, but I knew something wasn't right when I saw the man sitting at the bar, the one who seemed to be waiting for them. He wasn't familiar, but there was something about him that struck me as off. His confident posture, the way he kept checking his watch, like he was expecting someone. Jake and Sarah walked in together, but as soon as they saw him, they separated. Sarah walked toward the man at the bar, exchanging a brief, tense conversation. Jake followed closely behind, never looking away. It was like a secret meeting, one I wasn't supposed to witness. I stayed back, my heart racing, watching them speak in hushed tones. But what I overheard next made my blood run cold. "Are you sure it's ready?" Sarah asked, her voice low and urgent. "We can't afford any mistakes. This has to go exactly as planned." Jake nodded, glancing nervously around the room, then said something I didn't catch, but it was clear from his tone that he was involved in whatever was happening. The man at the bar responded, something about a deadline and finalizing the deal. There was a brief exchange of papers, just a few moments of tense silence, and then they left together, disappearing into the night, leaving me standing there, frozen. The weight of what I had just heard hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about an affair. There was something much darker at play, something that involved more than just Sarah and Jake. The papers, the meeting, the urgency, they weren't part of a typical love triangle. They were part of something bigger, something that I had no idea about until now. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. I had to know more. I had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The problem was, I didn't know where to start. What were they involved in? What was this deal they were finalizing? And how did I fit into this twisted puzzle? I couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. I had to play it smart, gather more information, connect the dots. I decided to do something risky. I hacked into Jake's email. I knew it wasn't right, but in that moment, I didn't care. I needed the truth, and I needed it now. What I found made my heart stop. There were emails, documents, and conversations between Jake and a few other individuals I didn't recognize. It wasn't just about a secret relationship. It was about money, about power. There was talk of business deals, covert meetings, and shady transactions. They were involved in something much more dangerous, something that could destroy everything. I couldn't believe it. Sarah had always been a bit materialistic, but I never suspected that she would get wrapped up in something like this. And Jake, the man I had once thought I knew so well, he was just as much a part of it. They had both been playing a game much bigger than I had realized, and I had only scratched the surface. This wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. This was about survival. I was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. The second layer of the mystery had been uncovered, and now it was time to dig deeper, to expose the truth for all to see. And when I did, I would make them regret everything they had done. The moment I realized that this wasn't just about betrayal, but something much larger, something that could change everything, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't sit in the shadows, piecing together fragments of a truth that had been so carefully concealed. No, it was time to confront them. Time to face Sarah and Jake, to force them to look me in the eyes and explain the twisted mess they had created. But even as I prepared myself for the confrontation, my mind raced. I had so many questions about the deal, the shady transactions, and most of all, about how deep their involvement ran.
The lies they had fed me for months were nothing compared to the betrayal that lay beneath the surface. The affair had been the entry point, the door that led me to uncovering something far more sinister. And now they would have to face the consequences of everything. I set the meeting in motion. I called Sarah first, telling her I needed to speak with her in person. She agreed, of course, thinking it was just another attempt for me to vent or ask for forgiveness. I was careful with my words, controlling the narrative so she wouldn't suspect anything. Then I called Jake. I knew he wouldn't turn me down. I told him I needed closure. I told him I couldn't move forward without understanding everything that had happened. They both agreed to meet me at the same cafe where everything had started to go wrong, the place that held memories of our friendship, of a time when I believed in their loyalty. I arrived first, sitting at a table by the window, watching the world outside as I waited for them to arrive. The air felt thick with anticipation. I wasn't nervous, not anymore, but there was something heavy in the pit of my stomach, a quiet resolve that had been building for weeks. The door to the cafe swung open, and there they were. Sarah, with that ever-present smile that didn't reach her eyes, and Jake, trying to act casual, like everything was normal. But I knew. I saw it in the way they looked at each other. Quick glances, nervous movements. They were just as unsure of this confrontation as I was, maybe even more so. I stood up when they approached the table. Sarah sat first, her posture rigid, her eyes avoiding mine. Jake followed suit, sitting across from me, his gaze fixed on the table. It was almost as if they were afraid to face me, afraid of what I might say. "What's this about, Emily?" Jake asked, his voice too calm, too practiced. He had always been good at hiding his true emotions, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped nervously on the table. He knew this wasn't going to end well. "I need answers," I said, my voice steady but firm, "and I'm not leaving until I get them." Sarah shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking briefly to Jake before returning to me. She seemed to be calculating her response, deciding whether to deny everything or try to explain herself. But I wasn't about to let her off that easily. "How long, Sarah?" I asked, my gaze locking onto hers. Her face turned pale. I could see the color drain from her cheeks, the guilt settling in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was trapped. The truth was staring her in the face, and there was no way to spin it. "It wasn't like that," she finally muttered, her voice shaking. "It was just once." "Once?" I interrupted, my voice cutting through the air. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I know everything." I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. "I know about the emails, the secret meetings, the business deals you've been involved in. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a plan." Her eyes widened in shock, and Jake stiffened across from me. He hadn't expected me to know this much. Neither of them had. I could feel the walls between us crumbling, the facade of friendship and love falling apart. They were exposed now, and there was nowhere to hide. "What is this, Sarah? What were you and Jake planning? What's all this about the deal, the papers, the meetings?" There was a long silence, and I could see the internal struggle playing out in Sarah's eyes. She wanted to deny it, to downplay everything, but she couldn't. She knew she was caught. We were working together," she admitted, her voice small. "Jake and we've been involved in something. It's bigger than just the affair. There's money, influence, power. We were trying to get out of the mess we're in." Jake looked at her, his face darkening, but she didn't look at him. She couldn't. It was clear now. Whatever this deal was, it was the driving force behind everything. The affair had just been a part of the plan, a way to manipulate me, to manipulate everyone. They had been using each other for their own gain, and I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. "You both used me," I said quietly, the anger bubbling just below the surface. You used me to cover your tracks, to hide what you were really doing, and now it's all falling apart. They exchanged a brief, uncomfortable glance, but neither of them spoke. They knew I was right. The truth was out, and there was nothing left to hide. No more lies, no more deceit. I leaned forward, my voice low but resolute. This ends now. They both looked at me, fear flashing in their eyes. They knew I wasn't the same person they had betrayed. I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. I was stronger than ever, and I was done being their victim. I'm not going to ruin you, I continued, but you will never forget what you've done to me. You will never forget what it cost you. With that, I stood up and walked out of the cafe, leaving Sarah and Jake behind. The confrontation was over, but it wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. My revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about showing them that I had the power to walk away, to rise above, and to take control of my own destiny. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The confrontation had been intense, no doubt. I had walked into that cafe expecting to feel a sense of closure, to have some kind of resolution after everything that had happened. But instead, all I felt was the raw heat of the moment, the adrenaline still coursing through me. It wasn't over. It couldn't be, not when there was so much left to unravel. I had exposed them, Sarah and Jake, stripped away the layers of lies they'd built around themselves, revealed the secret dealings, the manipulations, the power plays. But as much as I'd wanted to watch them squirm, to feel the weight of their guilt as they stared into my eyes, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. My plan wasn't about confronting them once and leaving it at that. No, I had to be strategic. I had to make sure they truly understood what they had done. I wasn't going to just walk away and let them rebuild their lives. This was my story now, and I would make sure they paid for every ounce of pain they had caused. The weeks after our confrontation were oddly quiet. Sarah and Jake tried to reach out, tried to apologize, especially Jake. He sent me messages, left me voice notes, each one more desperate than the last, but I never responded. I didn't need to. They thought they were the ones in control, that by apologizing, by begging for forgiveness, they could regain some semblance of power. But I had seen the cracks in their armor. I had seen the fear behind their masks, and I knew their weakness. Now, it was time to turn the tables and make them understand what it felt like to be helpless. I had a plan, a meticulous, calculated plan. I was no longer the heartbroken woman who had been blindsided by betrayal. I wasn't even the woman who had been left by a man who promised me forever. I was something more, something stronger, something unrecognizable to them. I had become the architect of my own revenge. The first step was simple. I had to lure them in, make them think that they had a chance to regain what they had lost. So, I orchestrated a false sense of opportunity. I knew that Jake, ever the manipulator, would jump at the chance to make things right, to salvage what was left of his reputation, especially with me. I crafted an email, carefully worded, promising a final conversation where I would give them both a chance to explain themselves one last time. I framed it as a forgiveness meeting, a chance to clear the air before I moved on. It wasn't just a message. It was a trap. I knew exactly what they would do. Sarah, desperate to smooth things over, would contact Jake, convincing him that this was their chance to salvage their broken friendship with me. I had no doubt they would take the bait. I had carefully manipulated the timing, giving them just enough hope to believe they were still in control. The moment they agreed, I would set the next phase of my plan in motion. The day of the meeting arrived, and I could almost hear the sound of their eager footsteps as they readied themselves for what they believed would be a peaceful resolution. I met them at a location I had picked, an upscale bar, a place where people could mingle in public but still remain out of reach, a place where they wouldn't expect anything to go wrong. When I walked in, I saw them sitting together at a corner booth, the look of relief and anticipation on their faces. They hadn't realized what was happening. They hadn't realized that I had been several steps ahead of them the entire time. "You came," Jake said with a grin, his voice too smooth, too eager. I smiled back, but it wasn't a smile of forgiveness. It was a smile of patience, a smile that hid the fury brewing beneath the surface. I sat down, not too close, but not too far, making sure they could see me clearly, could sense the calm confidence I now carried. "I came," I replied, my voice steady, "but don't mistake my presence for weakness." They exchanged a brief, confused glance, but neither of them spoke. Sarah was the first to break the silence, nervously picking at the napkin on the table. "We're really sorry, Emily. We never meant it to go this far. We were just—" "Stop," I interrupted, holding up my hand. I didn't need their excuses. I didn't need them to justify what they had done. They had already said enough, shown their true colors. This was no longer about forgiveness. I leaned in a little, lowering my voice. "You think I'm here for closure? You think this is some kind of pity party? But no. This is about one thing and one thing only. You two think you can walk away from this, rebuild your lives, and forget about what you did to me. But the truth is, you can't. Not after everything, not after what I've seen." The look on their faces was priceless. Jake's confidence faltered for a moment, his eyes flicking nervously to Sarah. Sarah's lips trembled as she tried to muster a response, but nothing came. She had no words left. And that is when I revealed it. "I've been watching every step, every lie, every deal you made. And now I have something that will make sure neither of you gets to forget what you have done." I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table between us. Their eyes locked onto it, but neither of them dared to touch it. I opened the folder slowly, revealing the documents, the photos, and the evidence of their deceit. The business deals they had been involved in, the people they had manipulated, the lies they had told. Everything was right there, ready for the world to see. I leaned back, watching the panic spread across their faces. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them, about their lies, their manipulations, their attempts to cover their tracks. "You wanted to rebuild your lives? But this time you'll do it in the light. This time you'll face the consequences." I watched as their world crumbled. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it. There was no going back now. They had thought they could escape, but they couldn't. Not anymore. This was my revenge. The trap was sprung, and they had nowhere to run. The fallout was inevitable, but it still hit harder than I expected. The documents, the evidence, the undeniable truth, they were all in front of them. I had orchestrated this moment meticulously, each piece of the puzzle falling into place just as I had planned. But seeing them face the consequences, watching their world shatter as their lies were exposed, it wasn't the catharsis I thought it would be. It wasn't the satisfaction I had imagined while fantasizing about revenge. No, it was far more complicated than that. It was the painful reality of what happens when people you love turn into your enemies, and the crushing weight of what it takes to truly move on. After I left the cafe, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel the relief of someone who had finally gotten even. Instead, I felt a quiet emptiness, as if the revenge I had sought had drained something from me, something I hadn't been aware I still had. I had wanted them to pay, to suffer as I had. But now, as I watched them scramble to salvage whatever they could from the wreckage of their lives, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow. The following days were chaotic. The fallout hit them both like a freight train. The papers, the business deals, the lies, they were all exposed. The emails I had found, the transactions they'd hidden behind their affair, the manipulation of so many people, it all came to light. The world they had built together crumbled under the weight of their deceit. Jake's world imploded first. His business partners, those who had once trusted him, admired him, dropped him like a hot potato. The carefully cultivated image of the charming, trustworthy entrepreneur was shattered. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Within hours, he was a pariah. The businesses he had built with Sarah's help, the deals they had made in the shadows, all of it came under scrutiny. It wasn't just a matter of his personal betrayal anymore. It was about his professional reputation, which was now tarnished beyond repair. I heard from a few mutual friends that Jake had tried to salvage his position, tried to explain his actions as a series of mistakes, but the damage was done. People saw him for what he truly was, a manipulative man who had used his charm to exploit others, including me. The emails I had uncovered, the dealings he had tried to hide behind their affair, the manipulation of so many people, it all came to light. His world imploded first. It left him with nothing. But the real devastation came for Sarah. She had tried to stay in the background as Jake took the brunt of the fallout, but she couldn't hide forever. Her role in all of this, her complicity, her manipulation, her involvement in the financial schemes, became impossible to deny. People who had once called her a friend turned their backs on her. Her social circle dissolved as quickly as it had formed. The guilt that had once flickered in her eyes when we met at the cafe soon turned into something more, something unbearable. She lost her job. Her career, built on connections and manipulation, was destroyed in one fell swoop. But it wasn't just the professional losses that hit her hard. It was the way she was exposed for who she really was. The perfect friend, the perfect maid of honor, the perfect accomplice to Jake's schemes. None of it mattered anymore. All that remained was the woman who had betrayed her best friend for personal gain. The woman who had sacrificed the only real relationships she had for power and money. The worst part for Sarah, though, was the silence, the emptiness that followed her as she wandered through the wreckage she had created. Her calls to me grew more frequent, more desperate. She begged for forgiveness, pleaded for a chance to explain herself. She even tried to appeal to my sympathy, claiming she was a victim of Jake's manipulation too. But I saw through her lies, saw the same pattern of deceit and self-interest that I once loved. She wasn't the victim. She was the mastermind, the one who had turned everything toxic and played me like a fool. I never responded to her messages. I didn't need to. I had learned the most painful lesson of all, that forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about moving on, about freeing yourself from the shackles of their betrayal. And I was ready to move on. As for Jake and Sarah, their fallout wasn't just a public shaming. It was a deep, personal unraveling. Their connection, their bond, had been built on lies and deception. And when it all crashing down, they were left with nothing but the wreckage of their own making. They tried to salvage their broken relationship, tried to patch things up in the aftermath, but I knew that nothing could fix what had been broken between them. They were both alone now. One betrayed the other, but in the end, they had both betrayed me. And that, in the grand scheme of things, was all that mattered. I didn't watch their downfall with malice or triumph. I watched it with a quiet acceptance, a calm realization that I didn't need revenge to feel vindicated. I had moved on. I had rebuilt my life stronger than ever before, more independent than I had ever been. Their fall from grace didn't make me feel better. It just confirmed what I already knew. That true strength comes from within, from the ability to rise above the people who try to drag you down. The fallout wasn't just their loss. It was mine, too. But unlike them, I was no longer trapped in the past. I had stepped out of the shadows of my own heartbreak and was finally free. The months that followed their collapse were quieter, But not because the echoes of their betrayal had faded. No, they still haunted me, echoing through the silence that followed. But they were no longer my ghosts. They were theirs. As I watched Jake and Sarah try and fail to rebuild their shattered lives, I realized something important. Revenge had never been about making them pay in the traditional sense. It wasn't about seeing them suffer for every moment of deceit they had orchestrated. It wasn't about watching them lose everything, though that certainly played a role. Revenge, at least for me, was never about the immediate gratification of their misery. It was about showing them and myself that I was more than their victim, that I could rise above their betrayal and rebuild my life on my own terms. And so I did. I focused on my career, throwing myself into my work. I started a new project, one that I had always dreamed of doing, but never had the courage to pursue. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth having ever is. I found new friends, built new connections, and started living the life I had always imagined. Only this time, it wasn't shaped by the lies of two people I once trusted. It was shaped by my own hands, my own choices. Jake, on the other hand, didn't seem to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. His life was a constant struggle now. Every attempt he made to crawl back into the business world fell flat. His charm no longer had the same power. People had seen who he really was, and that truth, once known, could never be undone. I had heard from a few mutual friends that he had tried reaching out to some of his old business contacts, offering to make amends, to apologize for his mistakes, but no one was willing to listen. The people who had once believed in him now saw him for what he truly was, a manipulator, a liar, a man who thought he could use everyone around him for his own gain. But the damage was irreversible. I could have taken satisfaction in that, but instead, I focused on my own growth. It was the best revenge, and it felt good. Sarah, however, was a different story. Her fall was quieter, but no less painful. The people she had manipulated, the friends she had once charmed, turned their backs on her. The relationship she had built so carefully over the years disintegrated before her eyes. She tried to start fresh, to rebuild, but it was like trying to start a fire with wet wood. It just wouldn't catch. She sent me message after message, begging for forgiveness, for a chance to talk. But I never responded. She was the one who had driven the wedge between us, not me. I wasn't going to play into her hands again. But even after all this, after everything she had lost, I knew the most painful realization for Sarah would come later. It wouldn't be in the loss of her friends, her career, or even her reputation. It would be the moment she realized that the person she had betrayed, the one person who had trusted her the most, hadn't let her actions define her. She would come to understand that I had moved on, that I had built something so much bigger than her betrayal, and that, more than anything else, would be her true punishment. Jake and Sarah were left with nothing but each other and the wreckage of their shared decisions. They tried to cling to their relationship, but it was nothing more than a fragile illusion. The foundation had crumbled, and they had no choice but to watch it fall. I didn't know where they ended up. I didn't need to. What mattered was that I had moved on, and so had they, whether they wanted to or not. The last time I saw Sarah, it wasn't by chance. It was orchestrated. I had heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had moved back to the city, that she was trying to rebuild her life in the place we had once called home. I didn't go to seek revenge. I didn't need to. But I knew that closure for both of us would only come when I saw her face to face one last time. I ran into her at a small bookstore, one I frequented on quiet afternoons when I needed time alone. She didn't see me at first, but I saw her, looking almost lost, the weight of the world on her shoulders. The woman who had once been my closest friend, who had shared my life with me, now seemed a shadow of the person I had known. She looked up and saw me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. No words were exchanged. We didn't need them. The silence between us spoke volumes. And in that moment, I realized something. I had won. Not because of the damage I had caused them, but because I had found my strength,
my independence, my peace. They had played a game, but they had lost. The most powerful thing I could do was simply walk away, to leave them behind in their wreckage while I moved forward, unscathed. As I turned to leave, I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't look back. She had already taken everything from me that she could. What she hadn't realized, what neither of them had, was that they had made me stronger. They had given me the gift of knowing my own worth, and that was something no one could ever take from me. The story had come full circle. The trap had been set, the payoff delivered, and now I was free. Truly free. And nothing, not Sarah, not Jake, not their lies or their deceit, could ever take that away.